No, you don't see my chat, do you?
No.
Okay. Okay, hello and welcome to the Sports and Active Recreation Talk. It's so nice to see so many people joining us. Thank you for attending. Just going to give it another minute and then we will kick off the meeting. Okay, it looks like we have around 40 plus people here already. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I know our time is very important. We're also busy, so I'd like to get started. So my name is Allison Perlman. I am the project manager for the Boston Parks and Recreation Department, and I'm working on the Moakley Park project. Before we jump into our presentation, I'd like to go over a few how-tos and what to expect. So first off, interpretation. Tonight, we have not had any requests for interpretation, so this meeting will be in English. However, for future engagements, please know we are eager to hear everyone's voice and are able to offer materials translated or interpretation for the meeting. So please just let us know. You can let us know by emailing me directly. For those that are on the phone, I don't see anybody on the phone, so I don't need to say that. But so you can email me directly, allison.perlman@boston.gov. Next slide. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and will be available on the project website within a week. I want to acknowledge those who are able to meet tonight. Thank you so much for your time. This plan is very much a community-driven process, so please share what you learned tonight with others and direct your neighbors, friends, and family to our website for them to view the recorded meeting when their schedule allows. I also want to note that during the presentation portion, your video and mic will be disabled. We will turn the video back on for the discussion, but please feel free to keep your video off if you do not want to be recorded. We want to ensure this conversation feels accessible to everyone and each one of you feels comfortable sharing your questions and comments. Please be respectful and mindful of others' time so everyone has the opportunity to participate. Keep questions project specific and not personal to encourage conversation which is solution driven. Once you have submitted or asked a question, please wait till others have an opportunity to ask questions before submitting another one. And you can always set up a conversation with me. Please contact me through my email, again, allison.perlman@boston.gov. So what do we have in store for you tonight? Well, 2 weeks ago, we held a Moakley Park preliminary plan overview. For those who were not able to attend, the recorded meeting and presentation slides are available on our website. We have 3 more engagement opportunities, including tonight. These talks will focus on a specific topic, and they'll give us the opportunity to see everyone and dive a little deeper on the design aspects which are most important to you in these areas. Tonight, we will focus on sports and active recreation. Next week, we will focus on community and play. And on November 24th, we will focus on public health and the environment. Please go to our project website where you can register. For tonight's meeting, following a brief presentation, we would love to hear your thoughts. Once the presentation is wrapped up, we will turn the video back on so we can see you for those who want to join via video. In addition, please submit questions via the chat feature if you are on a computer or tablet, or you can use the hand function, both which are on your screen. So at the bottom is the chat function, and then if you go to more, you can hit the chat function, or you can also see the raise hand. If you're joining us by phone, which I don't believe anyone is, but if you are and I can't see you, press *9 to raise your hand. We do ask that you include your name and any affiliated organization with your question. Hopefully that takes care of all housekeeping information. If you're not able to access your chat or your raise hand function, please chat with us in the chat box and we can help you out. All right, so today we are joined by an exceptional team, both from the parks and design consultants. From the parks team, I'd like to recognize Liza Meyer, who's the chief landscape architect. She's not here tonight, but she's been such an essential part of our team. We also have Commissioner Ryan Woods, who has a wonderful ability to bring people to the table and listen. And the Director of External Affairs and Marketing, Liz Sullivan, has so graciously joined us in the background to make sure the Zoom meeting runs smoothly. Thank you. From the design team, we have Amy Whitesides and Maren Braco from Stoss Landscape Urbanism, and Sherry Ruane from Weston Sampson. I also want to recognize a few electeds that are attending tonight. Representative Beal, Councillor Flynn, Senator Collins, I believe Councillor Flaherty, and staff. So thank you for attending tonight. As I mentioned, we'll start with a brief presentation, followed by a majority of the time left for us to talk with you. So let's kick it off with a few questions. First question is, did you attend the Moakley Park open house on October 27th? You can go ahead and answer these questions in your chat function. So I see a few people have attended. Not seeing a lot of responses, so please, if you don't know how to use your chat, let us know. Okay, and there's a couple no's. So great, okay, so there's a few that yes and a few no. So if you weren't able to make the last meeting, please go to our project website. It's at the bottom of the screen here, and that will direct you to the presentation which we recorded, and then we also have the presentations and slides available for you to look at. Can we go to the next question? What sports facilities do you use? Okay, so we're seeing the multi-purpose fields for rugby. Rugby. Oh, someone's been busy at rugby. Okay, skate park. This track. Great. This is really great. So it looks like a lot of people, oh, and there's some baseball here tonight too. Great. Perfect. All right, so basketball courts. Okay, so we have a good cross section of the sports teams that are here that use the park. Really helpful for tonight. I think I'm really excited about tonight because like I said, it's really a brief presentation. And then we're gonna turn it back to you guys to listen to you and to hear what you have to say. So next slide. Great, so as I said, we're gonna, first I think that I'd like to jump in and discuss a little bit about where we've been in terms of the 2018 vision plan, what we've heard, and introduce you to the 2020 preliminary plan and improvements. Next slide. So in 2018, we kicked off the plan to re-envision what Moakley Park could be. We heard how important sports programming was to the community, and this became a central part of the plan, as you can see. Next slide. During this period, we also heard the existing conditions were not conducive to maximizing field playability. Poor drainage often impacted play. Damaged turf was dangerous at times. Scoreboards and fencing needed to be reevaluated. Pathways were damaged. Lighting needed to be expanded. And fields were permitted for long durations, but sometimes no one was playing on them. Next slide. We also heard we needed to reconsider some layouts in the vision plan. We heard the stadium was really best at the south of the park near the tee, but also still needed some access to parking. One baseball field would be okay if we improved drainage, added lighting, and considered artificial turf. And we heard that natural turf was preferable for rugby players, and multi-use field dimensions should accommodate many sports. Next slide. Today, the 2020 plan reflects the many voices we heard from over the last 2 years, whether it was from youth league coaches to rugby and lacrosse players and community sports organizations. Next slide. The current layout moves the stadium with the track back to the south. It renovates some existing seating and reorients the new seating for better sports viewing and training. In the center, we have a 3-leaf clover configuration for 2 Little League fields and 1 softball field. We have 4 multi-use fields, 2 in the center of the park, 1 along the waterfront, and 1 at the stadium. All are natural turf except for the stadium. And we kept the baseball field in the north, adding artificial turf and lighting. Finally, we have 7 courts, 1 hockey, 4 basketball, and 2 tennis. I'm going to hand this over to Amy so she can dive a little bit deeper into the improvements.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So as Allison mentioned, the vision plan, the transition from the vision plan to this 2020 plan really sought to manage many of the issues that Allison pointed out. One of the biggest ones we understand is poor drainage in the fields, really limiting the ability for people to use the fields on a regular basis. So stormwater management and drainage improvements are a really important part of the plan. Just kicking that or starting off on that, each field, most importantly, will be equipped with field drainage. And in addition, there will be, under some of those fields, there will be sort of large stormwater management, like subsurface systems. We also have stormwater meadows throughout the park that are there to deal with some of the surface water that falls, outside of the fields, and occasionally today sort of starts to disrupt the edge of play. And then surrounding the park, we have tree trenches and porous paving that will be managing some of the water that's coming in off of the sidewalk and adjacent street. As well, we've really been looking at how can we improve the fields in order to extend the play and just make the play experience better. So Allison already mentioned we have artificial turf on 2 of the fields, the large baseball field at the north and the stadium at the south. Each of those would be include improved drainage and irrigation as required by that surfacing. We have natural turf on the other fields, and all of the main fields through the center of the park, so the large baseball, the 2 multi-use, the softball and little league, and the stadium will all be equipped with field lighting. So that will be really helpful in extending play later into the evening and just allowing a kind of longer period of use. And then we're really excited about a set of kind of additional amenities that are really meant to just make the play and park experience better. So starting out where, we have some kind of basic amenities that are required for play, especially with the softball and baseball, with some dugouts for each of those fields. Very important, looking at a set of buildings, which include bathrooms, that are sort of dispersed throughout the park, really making restroom facilities very easy to get to from any one of the fields. Additionally, a couple buildings that I'd like to point out here are the maintenance facilities located close to the baseball field at the north of the park, and then the Sports HQ, which is sort of centered in the middle of the park, which we're really interested to speak with you about. We envision that kind of being a place where many of the major needs for some of the regular users of the park, so the different sports groups who are permitting these fields regularly, can help to inform us of what kind of things need to go into that building and would be helpful to have in that building. So we're looking forward to hearing from you on that. And then lastly, around the stadium, at the edge of the Little League and at the back of the baseball diamond, we have spectator seating. Some of that is formalized seating and some of that is sort of grassy slopes with some shady trees that will let people kind of enjoy the game in a nice cool environment on hot days. So with that, as promised, we just wanted to keep the presentation short and really open it up to conversation with you and start to get your questions. And really, you know, we see this really as a dialogue and are interested in what kinds of things, you know, you want to, what can we help you understand about the plan, and what other things might we need to consider. I'll turn it over to Allison. Yeah.
I just want to go back. It looks like we had a couple of people join by phone, so I wanted to just repeat the instructions for how to raise your hand by phone here. Allison, if you wanted to go back to this slide here.
Sure, yeah. So again, we're going to open up to conversation. And if you're joining by phone, you can raise your hand by hitting *9, and then we'll call on you. Or if you're joining via the internet, you can either submit your questions through the chat function, or you can raise your hand and we can call on you and you can verbally ask your question. Great, so it looks like we are getting some questions coming in here.
All right, Sarah Freeman had her hand up.
Hi, everyone. I was wondering, I think I heard you mention parking for cars, I presume, which made me think, what is the access for bike parking and other neighborhood approaches to encourage not driving?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Sarah. I can take that one. So Moakley Park is really uniquely situated near many modes of transportation, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's, you know, a lot of people don't realize how connected it is. So we've got 2 red line stations right there within a 5 to 10 minute walk to the park. We've got, I think, 5 bus routes that run near the park. We have the Harbor Walk right there that's accessible through Carson Beach. And then we have areas of Roxbury, Dorchester, South End that are, you know, within a 10-minute bike ride for certain areas. So I think that's a really unique position for the park to be in. However, I've heard over and over that while this seems so accessible, the routes don't feel safe and they're not enjoyable. I think as the plan evolves, we're looking forward to kind of diving in with those pedestrian-focused advocacy groups and the public to understand what are the barriers to these forms of access, and starting to really understand, to learn from the insights that the community has to offer us to try to advocate for better access to the park via pedestrian, bicycle, public transportation. But I do want to acknowledge that, you know, we are going to also be, you know, looking at vehicular access. We understand that there's certain teams that have to be able to access the park, especially with equipment or other things. And so also, you know, looking at smaller parking areas as well. So it's kind of looking at both opportunities, but I do think that you bring up a really good point that our situation is so close to so many possibilities of public transportation and pedestrian and bike routes, and that really the focus should be on improving that access. And so we're looking forward to engaging the community and advocates to understand how to remove those barriers. Thank you.
Great, thanks. It looks like we have Alicia here has a question and she's having a little trouble raising her hand. So I'm going to ask you to unmute. And just a reminder to everyone, when you do ask a question, to make sure to say your name, maybe what sport you're interested in. Let me see if I can get Alicia's question here. Alicia, are you here? I asked her to unmute. Okay, maybe we'll try to get her.
Oh, no. Sorry, Maren. I was clicking unmute and it was saying that I wasn't allowed, but then here I am. So I did ask a question in the chat and then someone just texted me how to raise my hand. So all set now. But so my first key question, I'm a rugby gal. I actually am the person who submits all our permit requests for 6 of the rugby teams in the Boston area. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm glad to see that you said there are 4 multi-use fields here. But I'm wondering about their dimensions and if they'd be like, a rugby field is roughly the size of a soccer field. It's a little bit different, but it's roughly the same. Would those multi-use fields be about the right size, or what would they be looking at?
Sherry, do you want to take that question?
Sure. So yes, the goal there is that the rectangular fields are appropriately sized to be able to handle a whole bunch of different sports, rugby included. And so you can see here, we've planned for understanding that there will be larger sports, smaller sports, but that they'd all be able to be laid out within that same rectangle. And we're also really trying to be proactive as we look towards permitting, to make sure that seasonally we're giving certain fields a little rest, and allowing sports that complement each other as far as when they're played, so that one field isn't completely inundated, over what the grass can sustain. So that would all be part of it as well. But as currently they're being proposed as living grass, so they can be painted with the appropriate striping by the season.
Great. I think I'll call on Prophet here.
Hello, Prophet Parker McWhorter. I'm a phys ed teacher in Dorchester. My question is about permitting. So you mentioned before, like in the presentation, that permitting was being looked at because there was large chunks of time where permits were just like, where fields were like not being used and like had been blocked off for permits. I'm wondering what the kind of approach is going to be to like fixing that, because I feel like that's more of a systematic issue of how you actually apply for the permits and less necessarily to do with like the schematics of the park itself. And like similarly, like that availability for a lot of different organizations is what I'm also kind of just wondering about, because like the number of baseball fields is now just dwindling greatly. And just thinking about like their use in general and how that's always just a fight. Like the time, like as soon as your team is up, like there's another team immediately going over and over again, and how that's kind of being addressed.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And I think that we're just starting to kind of understand that a little bit better by engaging with the community, because we really get a snapshot of what's going on by looking at the permitting and who's there, but then we don't get a snapshot of who's asking for permits and not getting them. And so that's a challenge that we have, and that we're trying to kind of better understand. And part of that is coming to the community and talking to you. So that's great. I think that, you know, in terms of permitting going into the future, we still have a lot to do on the operating side of the plan. And I'll say this, just it involves not only just the permitting side of it, but the park rules and hours and all of that stuff is still being kind of figured out. But I hear you, and I recognize that it seems that it's hard for certain people to get, or certain teams to get permits, and that, you know, it's heartbreaking when we drive by and I know the field is permitted and nobody's there. And I know you guys see that too, and that's really frustrating. So we are going to start to dive into that a little bit in terms of the operating plan and how to better address that, because we know that these fields are precious and that everyone's trying to get on them. So we want to increase that utilization. So that's part of it, is we want to increase utilization, making sure that when we have the permits, people are using them. And the second is we want, while there are less fields, some of the types of fields, there's less of them here. We are thinking about the utilization. So we have issues now where fields aren't utilized all the time because of permitting. They're not utilized all the time because there's really bad drainage, especially in the north end there. They're not utilized because it gets dark really early. And so, or, you know, some of the fields are just completely torn up. So I think that we have a lot to address going forward and thinking about the operating plan, but we also have a lot that we can address in design and thinking about adding lighting, like we discussed, adding better drainage, adding fields that accommodate multiple sports, so that not only are we providing, you know, we're thinking about the permitting carefully, we're also expanding that playability of the field. So not only is it's a better condition, but we can play on it longer because we have the lighting, because the drainage is fixed. So all of those things I think will increase the actual use and the activation of the park. But hey, I want to thank you, Prophet, for joining. I always love having you at the meeting, so thank you.
Great. We've got Kevin with a question here.
Yes, Kevin Lally from the South Boston Babe Ruth League 1315, also Gatehaven CYO. Again, I would like that this, as I mentioned to the commissioner last week, one baseball field is not going to cut it. I don't know why we can't be treated the same way they are in the suburbs. They have what they call a varsity field and a sub-varsity field. And to put one baseball field down there, it's going to really hurt the Babe Ruth League and the teenage programs, because schools have first privilege. And if schools get first privilege, and if you have Boston, and especially now you consider this a citywide park, Boston Latin right off the bat has got a varsity, a junior varsity, and a freshman team that use the Moakley Park. I see you shaking your head, Prophet, and everything. Then you got South Boston High School. Where does that leave the teenagers from the rest of the city of Boston an opportunity to play on a field? I can't understand why you would cut one field to just one major league size field. There should be a varsity like they do in the suburbs. You have a varsity and a sub-varsity field. Those are my grievances, if you want to put. Other than that, I think it's a great plan. I think you've done a great job. But I am very dismayed at just having one baseball field there. Thank you.
Right. So I think that the 2020 plan was kind of addressing what we had heard. What we thought we heard was that one baseball field would be significant if we improved with the artificial turf and the lighting and everything. I think, you know, I hear what you're saying, Kevin. Again, thanks for coming tonight. And, you know, I think that the challenge for us is that, you know, our parks are designed as a system to meet the needs of the community, and that not one park can meet all the needs of the community. And so I think, you know, we're trying to balance what we've heard from the sports community and what we've heard from the community that isn't involved in organized sports, and trying to balance kind of the resiliency measures that we need to be thinking about with this park and the neighborhood. And so we're trying to balance all that and also meet the needs of the community. So I appreciate your comments, and, you know, we'll definitely bring this back up with with Commissioner Woods and permitting and try to figure out, like, if we do reduce the fifth one to one field, how does that affect our other parks and how do we manage all the teams and the use?
Great. And then we've got a couple of questions in the chat that are related to the building. So Allison, I think I'll give this one to you. We've got one asking about if the building in the center will be used for concession stands or equipment storage or meetings. And then a second one asking about changing rooms or locker rooms. And that's coming from Buddy Lane and Jack Garvey.
Okay, great. You may need to remind me of all the questions, but so the sports headquarters, I think, is what they're referring to, and that is a space holder. We've heard that, you know, the leagues, the sports teams need better support facilities, and what is in that facility would be helpful to hear from you guys what you want to see. You know, we know for sure restrooms are really important to all park users, so that would be in there. And then, you know, I'm guessing some kind of meeting room for the sports teams would be helpful, but we'd like to hear from you. And, you know, if you could pop in the chat and let us know, what do you really want to see in that sports headquarters? That would be great. That's what this meeting is about, is to hear from you and to see what's really important to your teams in that building.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. We've got Sarah here with her hand up.
Oh, hi. My name is Sarah Harkness. I am with the Rugby Co-op. We represent 6 teams like Alicia was speaking about earlier. So I think everyone has concerns about how many fields are being cut. And I think that you're getting a great idea of how concerned we are about that. For about 6 months out of the year, we have rugby matches on every single Saturday, and we have multiple matches. So with the lights and everything, it's, you know, totally feasible that we could work that out with less fields. And my concern kind of comes in with, since the park is being redone and it's going to, you know, ostensibly be nicer, my concern comes in is that then we will no longer be allowed to permit there because we have to dig holes for uprights. And we have found that, you know, there are specific fields that our permits are always turned down for. And just, you know, that's the place we've been playing rugby for years and years and years for our matches. And we have had to dig, you know, like we have to dig for the uprights. That's part of the game. Another concern I have looking at the map is it looks like at the end of one field is some other activities. And in rugby, we do conversion kicks. So the safety of having other activities at either end of a pitch that is a multi-purpose sport with balls, you know, going various places, whatever sport it is. And then my final concern is currently the watering system is like in the middle of the field. There's very unsafe areas that have like access boxes, and we have to like put cones around them during matches to make sure nobody gets hurt. So just concerns about how will an irrigation system be safely applied to all of the multi-purpose fields for the safety of anybody using them, because right now it's exceedingly unsafe for anybody trying to run on those fields.
So I'll jump in, and then Allison, if you want to pick up. So things we're looking at are potentially a sleeving system for the uprights so that you don't have to dig, and that you can there'll be already a place to receive the uprights that could have a cap over it when you're not using it, to try to minimize that sort of interference. And it's something that we can take a look at and work with the league to figure out what the best system is. What our goal is, the more of these rectangular fields that can handle more sports, we can better distribute the intensity of use seasonally. If there's only one field that can be used for a certain sport, it gets overused and then the grass does not survive. So that's one component, and definitely hear you on the irrigation. It should not be that there are handholds and those control boxes in the field of play. Those will be moved outside the limits of play. And some of that are holdovers from, it was open lawn, and then people said, oh, we should put a rectangular field here, but the irrigation was already in. So that's something that will absolutely be addressed. And you had asked a third question that I was really intent on remembering, but could you just repeat it? Oh, what was it? Do you?
I don't remember. Alicia, do you remember what I said?
It was a good question.
Was it about the buffer around the edges of the field? Did you?
No, it was upright. It was the irrigation. Oh, it was the end. Yes, the things at the end. Still got it at 6:30. So yes, that's always a concern about adjacencies and making sure that there's safety at the ends of play. So there's two things that we look at. One is making sure that the fields that do have rugby and other sports, but that's sort of overrun, we don't have activities out there, or sometimes we have used sports field netting that allows there to be a transparent yet safe barrier so that things stay contained. Despite the fact that this is a 60-acre site, these footprints do take up a lot of space, and they obviously have orientation preferences and things like that. So we're trying to fit them all in optimally and also allow there to be a little bit of space between them, and cloister them in zones so that that makes sense organizationally. So all of that comes into play, but I appreciate all three of those comments as they relate to making sure that these multi-use fields not only operate for a bunch of sports, but operate at a high level for a bunch of different sports. And I do want to just answer Josh's question in the chat. Joshua's questions, when are the renovations going to be complete? And this is definitely a phased project that is going to be implemented over a number of years. So while I think our hope is that we start in the next year or two in design and permitting, and then the construction of a first phase, it's going to be a number of years before the entire thing is complete. And Allison, I don't know if you want to add more to that.
No, I mean, I agree. It's a phased construction over, potentially 10 to 15 years. But we're anxious to get the shovel in the ground because we know that people want to see improvements right away. I do also want to reiterate that I recognize that the group that we're talking to tonight, sports is really, really important. And you guys spend a lot of passion and time, your lives doing this, and it's awesome. I love the activation of the park. It's so critical to this park. But I also want to recognize that there's a lot of community just adjacent to the park that, again, doesn't do organized sports. And so we're trying to listen to their needs as well and fit programming in for the park that also includes them and is welcoming to the entire community. And then we're also really dealing with going back to kind of the vision plan, the resiliency measures. So thinking about how this area is a flood pathway, and that it's really important for us to figure out a district level resilient strategy that helps protect the neighborhood from future coastal flooding in particular. And so part of the park is addressing that piece of it too, is providing flood protection for the neighborhood. And that's why you're seeing a reduction in fields. So again, recognize that it's hard to see a reduction in fields, but I think that you guys will see that as we progress and start constructing, that the utilization of these fields will be a lot higher, and that you'll be able to use them more effectively.
Great. And so someone was asking for this slide again to see which fields were natural turf versus which were artificial turf. This question comes from Timothy through the chat. And so hopefully this clarifies that. And then he was also asking about the dimensions of both the baseball, little league, softball, and kickball fields. And I'll just say that for now, we've looked at how people are using it based on permitting and these engagement events. And we've tried to sort of leave the most amount of space for each of those fields based on the leagues that we know. But if you have specific requirements and leagues that you want us to be aware of, certainly share that information in the chat and follow up with us afterwards. Let's see. Allison, someone is asking about the restrooms and whether or not there will be an all gender option.
That's a good question. I mean, why not? I don't know what the real answer is on that, but I haven't thought about it yet. We're really, really early on, like this really high level, but I feels like that's the standard.
For sure. And I think too, a family restroom, a unisex restroom can all be multitask, but it's important when a dad has a 10-year-old daughter, or, you know, like you need to be able to go to the bathroom safely and comfortably. So.
We're also receiving a couple of questions about maintenance and safety. So William Collins is asking, will this park be properly maintained? And then also William Collins, there are currently drug problems, homeless issues at the park, and other criminal activities. What will we be doing to address them? Allison, would you like to take that?
Commissioner Woods, can you take the current safety issues? Can someone unmute him? Is he muted? Can someone, okay, there we go.
Thank you. I'm not used to be muted like that. Yes, so that has come up in conversations that we've had, especially with the sports groups there. I think there's many possibilities, especially when we're looking at these buildings. Like things come to mind like South Bay Shopping Mall, how they have their own area for Boston Police and Public Safety to be in that area. So maybe as we have future discussions, maybe there's a place in the park for our public safety, should that be needed. But Parks Department does not do enforcement. We are the cleaning, emptying the trash barrels, lining the fields, permitting the fields, programming the park. So it is in our partnership with the local captain at C6 and Boston Police that would be there for the enforcement. But I think as these phases go through and we complete the parks, we'll be looking at each strategy at the time and continuing to work with Boston Police on the most effective ways to do that. Currently on the opioids, I know this year, this summer, my son played at Tenacity there at Moakley, and every day we were doing needle sweeps out there with the homeless and with Boston Public Health Commission. So that is a strategy with the task force we're continuing to work with, doing daily sweeps. And I think as we get further in the design, we have more possibilities for public safety and the role that they play within the park.
Great, and I can answer the kind of the maintenance piece. So I think that, you know, the Boston Parks recognizes and acknowledges that the plan that we're presenting today will require enhanced maintenance, increased programming and partnerships. So I think as we further develop a sustainable operation plan, we'll start addressing these and figuring out what is, you know, how do we offer enhanced maintenance and how do we make sure that these fields are fully utilized and that maintenance isn't holding them back.
And I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce your name, so I'm just going to ask you to unmute and hopefully you will see that.
No worries. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Ray Javier. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a student at UMass Boston. Thank you for hosting tonight's session. It's exciting to see this project come into process as we're looking ahead from this year. I do have a couple of points and questions that I wanted to bring up and ask. First, regarding the gender bathrooms, I also emphasize and encourage that too. I think that'd be really important. And Sherry, to your point, with unisex bathrooms as well as family bathrooms, I think that's critical just to maintain as much of an inclusive environment for this park as possible. And then also regarding public safety, I know the Massachusetts State Police Department is nearby there as well. And at least I would just like to say to in these conversations to be mindful with police presence in these spaces, as we do, as the Dorchester community is a very diverse community with Black folks, Latinx folks, and so in terms of what police presence looks like in the park, to be mindful of that and how police should be present in these spaces, as it does also create an uncomfortable atmosphere for some folks as well. And then I did want to also just echo some of the points that other folks have made just regarding the baseball field and space availability overall. I think it's really critical. It was great to hear just the perspectives of other folks and coaches who have shared just their permit challenges. Excuse me, and just the need for another baseball field. I think if possible, I'd also like to just get behind that and advocate for that as well, because I think as coming from UMass Boston, I know just looking at this at our athletics department here as well, we also struggle to kind of find excuse me, I know that we do not have our own personal kind of fields, whether that's baseball or football or track. And I know that from the athletics department, they could really benefit from also collaborating and getting a bite from this, excuse me, like a bite from this type of project as well, to kind of amplify our athletics programs and recreation programs at the university here. So the question that I did want to bring up was just if there was any community advisory board or committee that was in place as well to kind of touch base with different stakeholders across the Dorchester community. And if we can connect, if there's a way that we can connect with them or just know who's on that committee. But apologies, I put a lot out there, but yeah.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think I hear you in making sure that this park feels safe for everyone is important to us. Especially this has kind of been a tier of us working on making sure that everyone's voices are heard. But we also, once we construct it, we want to make sure that everyone feels safe in the park as well. So thanks for acknowledging that. And we are working hard to make sure that that is part of the process. And we would love to kind of understand better from the community what are the things that make people feel unsafe in the park. We know that needles and drug use and that type of thing makes them uncomfortable. What are the other things that make you uncomfortable? So that's always interesting for us to hear to make sure that we're addressing that. In terms of the baseball fields and UMass Boston, initially we've been working closely with UMass Boston because they are our neighbor and the Dorchester community is our neighbor, and so we're trying to integrate kind of a better partnership and understanding of how we can work together and support each other. So that's important. Early on in the vision plan process, we had an advisory group committee, but we have since, we're really kind of diving into schematics now. And so we're mostly going just back to the general community where obviously the advisory group members are part of the general community as well. And we are engaging with a lot of Dorchester communities and organizations because while this is in South Boston, it is really close to Dorchester. And so understanding how people from Dorchester would be using is helpful to us. So we'll continue to engage with both neighborhoods just because it's 60 acres, so it does serve multiple neighborhoods.
Jean-Marie, also I wanted to note, you asked a question earlier in the chat as well about the material being online, and everything will be on the website. Which we'll ping at the end of the meeting. We'll bring that up again. So this meeting, as well as the previous presentation where we kind of went through the sort of overview of the whole park, is there.
Great, thank you. We've got a couple of sports field questions for Sherry that have come through the chat.
Yeah, so one was about, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say thank you for your patience. We're getting a lot of things here, so we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. But I haven't forgotten about you if you see that they're trying to group them here. So Sherry, there was one about pickleball, and then one about the field hockey and the ability to line the stadium field.
Right. So pickleball, actually, as the person that asked probably knows, is one of the fastest growing sports right now in America. And it's hugely popular and a great multi-generational option for folks. So something that we've been looking at in parks all over the city, twofold. One is you can either do individual pickleball courts that are dedicated just to pickleball, and you can fit a couple together. And the other is that you line tennis courts as pickleball courts, and you can actually fit one on either side of the net in those cases. So those are both options, and we are interested in hearing from folks. If that is a big interest, that's where we want to hear from you to understand who's out there now playing, but also recognizing fully that it's something that a lot more people are playing long into their life. So thank you for that question. And then on the field hockey for the stadium, we are definitely going to be looking, as a synthetic turf field, the way that the marking of fields works is two possible ways. One is that it can be sewn in, so the carpet that is the synthetic turf itself can actually have colored lines sewn into it, and so those are pretty darn permanent. And then you can also paint the synthetic turf, which can be erased, if you will, as it wears away, and new ones can be put on. So those are the two ways that it can happen. And depending on intensity of use and how many different teams or leagues are going to use it for a particular sport, that helps to identify which are permanently lined and which are painted lines. But it's definitely something that synthetic turf can accommodate.
Great. It looks like we also have a question here about lighting in between the fields. And Amy, maybe I can shoot this to you. We have a plan here of the full lighting that I'll just pull up. And I'll just read the full question here because I think it's an important one. I'd love to know more about the lighting situation between fields, if there's a plan for it yet. I'm local to the park, live less than a mile away. I play rugby. And one of the things that makes me feel safe as a woman is to not have to walk at home or in my car in the dark. And that comes from Colleen.
Great, thanks, Colleen. It's a super important question, and we are looking at multiple forms of lighting throughout the park. So I talked earlier just about lighting the fields, but as you're pointing out, there's so much, all the rest of the park you have to go through just to get to the field will be looked at. The kind of two most important parts of lighting. One is just lighting along walkways and pathways and ensuring that there's a kind of baseline safety level of lighting across the park, so we don't have really bright areas and really dark areas. And then the other is also, there will be some kind of moments of feature lighting, so some areas that get some specialty lighting, basically. And all of that we're looking at with trying to take into consideration areas of use. Safety, as you mentioned, is kind of key. And then also a number of people have brought up questions around just light pollution and the neighborhood, and ensuring that that lighting is well attuned to keeping kind of not creating light pollution and not disrupting people at times where it's not needed. So there's a balance there, and as people have said in response to other questions, we're still very high level, so we'll keep working on that, and stay tuned. I think we'll continue to have more information about the lighting, but I think the simple answer to the question is we're also thinking about that. It's super important, so that will definitely be taken into consideration.
Okay, it looks like we've got another question from Alicia.
Thank you. So I have a question about, you touched on it a bit earlier, but I just want to see if you could give a little more information about the rotation of field use and what you're envisioning there. and here's my reason for asking. You know, there are days where the rugby community needs to use 3 fields at one time, or we have used 3 fields at one time, because it's not just one team. You know, there's 6 teams that are part of the co-op. There's probably four or so other in the immediate Boston area that have used Moakley in the past. And then, of course, our opponents from, you know, cities as far away as Burlington, some even fly in from Raleigh or what have you. So there is a lot of people using these fields, and often at one time. So, and obviously competing with other sports, which, you know, should be able to use the park too, and we're fully supportive of that. So I'm just wondering, what restrictions would there be to, you know, being able to use multiple fields at once for a single sport?
I can try to answer that. Thanks, Alicia. You know, again, we're just not there yet. I understand that there's a need to have multiple fields permitted at one time, and we're just not. We haven't hit into the operation plan yet to figure out how the permitting would work and how we can do a better job of it. And so, I think just kind of acknowledging that you know, the rugby teams would like to be able to permit 3 fields at one time, and starting to think about that is helpful. And also, you know, from the leagues too, and understanding like, well, you know, we really need 2 fields at once, or whatever it is. Understanding what that is just helpful for us and will help inform the operating plan. So I can't answer that right now, but we'll take your comments into consideration and try to figure out a way that we can do a better job.
Yeah, great. And I just want to say thank you, because I mean, I think this, when I first heard the plan, I thought it was only going to be like 2 fields, and I was really nervous. And I just want to say thank you, because it looks like a really good plan. And I think that these are things we can work out together. I'm just, you know, excited to work with you guys about it.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's great to have so many people engaged, because there's nothing worse than trying to engage and no one shows up, and we're like, I don't know, like, what should the dimensions be? What's important? These uprights, like what? So I'm really happy you guys are here. I'm happy, you know, we've got track enthusiasts here. We've got baseball, softball, Little League, lacrosse. Everyone is kind of here. And so it's great to hear from everyone and understand what the needs are.
Thank you.
Some folks have been asking questions about field dimensions. And so this is also to your point, Allison, like this is where we really want to hear from folks. Like, what do people think is needed? So I saw a couple in the chat, folks saying, you know, 300-foot outfield really accommodates a lot of different levels of play. And then as far as the rectangular fields go, we obviously, again, we want to accommodate as many sports as possible. So we're going to be taking a deeper dive into those specifics, but we are trying to make each of those fields accommodate the widest possible range. And I guess one thing I'm interested in hearing about from folks who may be here from softball and baseball is one of the ways that we have found to make fields as flexible as possible is to have a skinned infield and a movable pitcher's mound, just so that folks can adjust as needed. And I don't know if that's something that folks have used before, and if there's any, you know, strong opinions about it. Tim's a fan.
It looks like we've got some excitement about that. Yeah, if you guys want to just add into the chat, anything to add specifically would be great. I think we did have a couple of questions that we wanted to ask you all, and so maybe this would be a good time to do that. I know that question came up at the open house too, about how we'd be treating the infield.
Right.
And that's
Also,
certainly flexible.
Another question that came up is the multi-purpose fields, right? The rectangular fields accommodate so many sports. One of the questions from Joshua is, can we incorporate one more? Because what we're showing is 2 larger rectangular fields and then one smaller, sort of more flexible field closer to the beach. So, you know, I think what we're hearing is everybody would like more. And to the point, you know, the response that you're hearing is there's a lot that needs to happen in this park, from climate resilience and sea level rise to managing stormwater to accommodating play and other things. There actually, for 60 acres, is a lot to fit. So it's something we're trying to balance, but we really appreciate hearing, you know, what people are really desiring here.
And I've got a question from Councillor Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you for having this important meeting and discussion with the residents about Moakley Park. It means so much to the residents of South Boston. And I'm thankful and grateful really for the leadership from the commissioner and Allison and the entire team, the design team as well. So I just want to say thank you on that regard. And the community involvement has been exceptional, engaging, and that's what this town is all about. I think I've spent more time down the Babe Ruth League field this summer. My son plays Babe Ruth at Moakley Park, and you know, South Boston has had a long tradition of sports and competition and teamwork. So you know, everyone is part of the process. Every opinion is important. And, you know, we want to make sure that South Boston residents and Boston residents as well have a chance to play in these great fields. The Babe Ruth is very important. Little League is very important, but also other sports are also important. And my comment, I guess, is I've received a lot of feedback too. We want to make sure it's as safe as possible and accessible as possible to all kinds of people, especially persons with disabilities as well. So I heard that loud and clear from my constituents, that we want a safe park and an accessible park. We're welcoming to all, regardless of the sports. But you know, I just want to say thank you to the parks team and the commissioner.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. I appreciate you coming to so many of our meetings and, you know, being available to chat with. We hear you loud and clear that, you know, the community sports is really important, and it's a great community builder, and we're excited to have it as part of the park. We're also, safety is really important, and balancing like what makes a safe park, and thinking about, you know, what we envision for this park is that kids and families and residents are activating this park from morning to evening. And we think that that's going to make a big difference in how people feel safe in this park, is that there's a lot of people around, and that really helps with safety. And then also just thinking about lighting and making sure that lighting is dispersed, that we don't have areas that are super bright and then super dark, but kind of balancing the lighting is really important. And then, you know, working with District C6 and, you know, thinking about how do we think about safety, but also thinking about how everyone feels safe is really important. So, you know, and let me also add, the community organizations that surround this community are incredibly helpful, and it's a real opportunity to think about how do we work together as a community to make sure that this park is safe. And it feels safe. And so I think that we have the opportunity, as we're re-envisioning Moakley Park, to kind of re-envision safety and what it looks like and what it feels like. And so we're really excited to work with you and organizations to kind of figure that out together. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
Great, thank you, Councillor Flynn. We have a question in the chat coming from Alice. By dealing with drainage and added lighting, how will that expand the availability of fields? Will more games be played in total than with the existing conditions?
That's a great question. And I think it reinforces really what Allison was saying at the beginning, which is there are fields that are simply not reaching their full potential like they're people. They really just need to reach their full potential. So conditions can be suboptimal. We know there's one field out there now that's a real ankle turner and is known as such. If the drainage is poor, it can't be used for a week after it rains. The lighting, that sort of stuff expands hours. It was dark today at 5 o'clock. So those are the things that expand field capacity in a way that allows them to be played on certainly more. Not only that, but that they'll be used when they're permitted. I think some of the things that we've seen, not just here, but in parks around the city, is that a team will get assigned a field and they'll be like, oh, the ankle breaker field, we can't play on that field. So then they don't use that time and it's an underutilized resource. So by improving the quality of these fields universally, not only will it expand playability, but it also improves their ability to be maintained. It's really hard to get a field back after it's been used intensely after a rain and it's been muddy. Once that ground surface starts to deteriorate, it's really hard. Grass is in fact a living plant. And so anyone with a house plant knows it's not easy to keep those things going sometimes, especially when it's being run over by cleats. So it's something that we really do take seriously and know that there needs to be, really great conditions that would allow the parks crews to then maintain them appropriately.
Great, thank you. And we've got Kevin here who's been pretty patient. I'll let him ask his question.
It's just Kevin Lally again. I just want to respond to the question there that was about movable infields and everything on the baseball fields. That's the easiest way to totally damage a baseball field is once you start putting other sports on there, especially if it's artificial turf. Just my opinion. Thank you for having me back on.
Yeah, I think the idea is that larger baseball field would be more singular level play. It's got the larger outfield. It's 400 feet in the pocket. That would remain. But those smaller fields in the 3-leaf clover there, the most flexibility that we can introduce, the better. But you're absolutely right. With those shifts does come a need for a higher level of maintenance, especially with the infield mix.
Okay, and Alicia has another question about the smaller multi-use field. So that's the one up here along the waterfront.
Yep.
I'm gonna pull up, we did a little comparison of what that size field is compared to what we have, those smaller multi-use fields that you have existing today, and they're roughly the same size. So not large enough for a lot of the sports, but certainly volleyball and some of the other sports.
Also, they're ideal for youth soccer and youth lacrosse, which uses a much smaller field. You can actually fit a couple of fields crosswise on there, and that actually relieves pressure from the bigger rectangular fields. So just having that ability, the level of soccer where it's the pop-up goals with no goalie, that sort of thing can happen there, and there can be a ton of those happening at once. So it is a helpful field. Plus, it's nice to have something closer, I think, to the beach that can be used a little bit more flexibly, should that be desired as well. But that helps relieve pressure.
And then another question here about the ability for the stadium to function as a multi-use field. Sherry, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so I think we touched on it earlier, just talking about how that could happen, whether it's the sewn in lines or whether it's painted. And I think it's something that honestly, we want the flexibility to be able to have the stadium accommodate a high level of play. And we want that to be multiple sports. We certainly don't want it to be just one sport. And it's something that we need to take into consideration as we're sizing it, because football tends to be longer and narrower, and soccer tends to be wider, and lacrosse has different dimensions, and field hockey has different dimensions. So I think it's looking at the sports that really have the most use now, and also are looking to Moakley to be their sort of premier level play in a stadium facility. And that's how I think some of those design decisions will end up being made.
Great, thank you. It looks like we've answered most of the questions we've had, and I know we're past the 7 o'clock time. Please raise your hand if I've missed something, but it looks like we've covered a lot here. I think one question we had, just while we still have, let's see how many people are still with us. We've still got 42 people with us. There's a couple of things we wanted to know in terms of, we know you play sports on the field, but what, in terms of exercise stations, like, are you also using those for training, and what would be most helpful? Where would they be most helpful? That's something we've been looking at. So maybe if you want to raise your hand or answer in the chat, that would be great. We could have a follow-up conversation about that. Looks like some people are signing off here.
Sorry, while people are, if they're thinking about that, do you want to just switch to the to the slides with the next upcoming meetings?
Sure. Oh, I see one more question, saving for the end. There's a question about the cost for the new park and what the latest estimate is.
That's a really good question. Yeah, so we, as I mentioned, it's going to be phased construction. We're constantly kind of refining the plan. And right now we're looking at, around 250 million for the final complete park. But honestly, we think that that's lower than a lot of these kind of bigger sports facility, athletic parks, or destination parks. It's actually less expensive, especially when we're considering that resiliency is added into this. So we're adding a lot of stormwater management and the coastal flood protection system. So we think that that's kind of a good target. And so we're going to be obviously relying on multiple funding sources to meet that.
And then can you also just clarify, I know you had also mentioned how long we're anticipating the full renovations and completion of the park, but just clarify what that timeline is.
Yeah, so it's really hard to say because again, it's really reliant on the funding and the availability of it. But we're looking at, it could be. We've thought from the beginning it'd probably be like a 10 to 15-year process. It could be accelerated. We have a new president, and he may be pushing for bigger infrastructure bills and actually constructing stuff. And there's a big focus on resilience infrastructure. So I think that timeline could be moved up, but it might not be. And so we just, we're going to make sure that we're ready to go. We're going to, next couple of years, we're doing schematic and then construction documents, and we're trying to push forward so we're ready to go. And once the funding's available, we'll be ready to build.
Great. It looks like in that time we had another question come in about multi-use fields. I'll give this one to you, Sherry. Has there been any thought into making the multi-use field accommodate baseball fields like the Roch field at Wentworth?
Right, so that does get a little bit tricky. We always want to be careful about where edges of play are, and we never want infield mix to be within the playing surface of a rectangular field. So it's really the outfield of ball fields that then can potentially be shared. So that's something that we can definitely take a look at. And I think just given the feedback that we've gotten tonight, just understanding that, of course, we'd love to have a limitless number of fields, but is there a way that maybe one more field can fit in? And if that's possible, then could it be a multi-use field that has all of the things in it? That's something certainly to consider and take a look at. So I think that that's a great question, and it does increase the options. But we also, like I said at the beginning, we want to make sure that we're not just checking boxes and saying, yes, there's a field there for you, but that it's a field that functions at a high level and allows maintenance to be able to take care of it. I love that note that, so Alicia just shared with me, she saw a kid's step dance competition in the stadium, which is amazing. So yeah, the stadium, we really want the stadium to serve as many people as possible. And it's really about equity and expanding capacity, and not just for football, which is of course traditionally the stadium sport. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's absolutely possible that it can then support, you know, women's rugby and women's lacrosse and boys soccer, and you know, more of that cross profile of the population. I think that's important. And we already know from being out there, Chris Reed in particular, who spends a lot of time out there, all the exercising and all the boot camps and all the, you know, things that happen informally every day. It's an incredibly well-used facility, especially these days. So probably especially today, because it was 75.
Great.
Great. Well, yeah, I want to say thank you to everyone that's participated tonight. This has been a really helpful session. Hopefully it's been helpful for you, but hugely helpful for our team. I think you guys have presented a lot of great ideas. And I'm thankful that I have a great design team to think about everything you said and be creative and trying to figure out how to make this really work. So thank you. And I just want to also plug the next two engagement events. We have Community in Play, which is next Tuesday, and then the Public Health and Environment, which is November 24th. So we would love for you to engage again, come out and share your ideas about other areas of the park. And thank you. Oh, and please visit our website for more information. Everyone have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.